Okay, thank you, Badri. Good evening and welcome to Tamil Heritage Trust's monthly Heritage Talk. Thank you for joining us this evening. For those of you who are new to Tamil Heritage Trust, let me give you a quick introduction. We were established way back in 2010 with the objective of to understand, appreciate, disseminate, celebrate India's rich and varied heritage. And we do this through a number of programs. This monthly Heritage Talk itself is one of the main programs that we run. It happens on the first Saturday of every month, and it's been happening so since 2010 for almost 12 years now. These are talks by specialists, experts, as well as enthusiasts on a wide range of topics: archaeology, epigraphy, art, numismatics, history, prehistory, temple architecture, name it, anything that has to do with India and its rich heritage. All our talks are available for viewing subsequently on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/Tamil Heritage Trust. And those of you who are here today, I would request you to subscribe to our channel as well as to click on the bell icon to receive notifications of our future events. All our talks, of course, are free to the audiences. We also conduct workshops on specific themes. For example, we have a program called How to See a Temple, which is a full-day workshop with theory on architecture, sculpture, iconography, epigraphy, and so on in the morning, and then a physical demonstration of these aspects in a temple here in Chennai. We conduct classes on Pallava Grantha and other scripts as well, and so on. We conduct an annual 2-day seminar called the Pecha Kacheri, which is an in-depth look at any one topic or region or a dynasty and so on. These are well-attended programs we have conducted on topics such as Pallavas of Kanchipuram, of Mamallapuram, Cholas, Pandyas, and so on. And most recently, we conducted we just completed and concluded a Pecha Kacheri on Kalinga, which is to discuss Odisha's heritage through temples, inscriptions, archaeology, and history. We had 8 talks over 2 days, talking about Odisha and its rich history and heritage. We conduct site seminars, which is a program where every participant is both a teacher and a student. We select a site and then we prepare to visit that site over a period of 3 to 4 months, studying its history, its significance in heritage, its architecture, sculpture, and so forth, and then visit the place. Here are some pictures from our past visits. We have done site seminars at Ajanta, Srirangam, Gujarat, Tirunelveli, Badami, Aihole, Pattadakal, Madhya Pradesh, and so on. We even squeezed in one site seminar at Tanjavur and Kumbakonam just before the pandemic struck in 2020. Of course, the program has been suspended for the last 2 years because of the pandemic. Last year, we conducted an Indology festival with speakers and specialists and academics from across the globe, again on a wide range of eclectic range of topics on Indology. It included prehistory, early history, mathematics, Chola bronzes, and so on and so forth. We also had a few contests for the public to participate and to make it a true festival. Last year, we started a program called Alamaravai, which is specifically and exclusively for school and college teachers who are interested in spreading the word of heritage among their students. We try and help them to spread the word through establishment of heritage clubs in schools, as well as through equipping them with materials with which they can communicate interestingly to students. A couple of years ago, we established the THT Professor S. Swaminathan Heritage Award, an award that is given to an individual who contributes significantly not only to the study and the preservation of heritage, but also to its communication to wider audiences. And the last 2 years, winners were Madhusudan Kalichelvan and Dr. Shankar Narayanan last year. That is the award. And with that, we come to the, that's a little bit about the THT itself. And with that, we come to the speaker of today. And I'm particularly delighted to welcome Dr. Srinivas Reddy, who is our distinguished speaker today. And let me introduce him to you first. It's my privilege to do so. First, let me introduce Dr. Srinivas Reddy, the musician. He began his musical training as a guitarist and a composer. In 1998, he graduated from Brown University. And then he met his guru and mentor, Sri Partho Chatterjee, and has since dedicated himself to Indian classical music. He's rigorously trained with him, the Guru Sishya Parampara. And he's a professional concert sitarist and has given numerous recitals in the US and India and Europe. He has 3 albums to his credit as well, released in 1999, 2001, and 2008. But it's not Dr. Srinivas Reddy, the musician, that we have invited today to talk to us. It is Dr. Srinivas Reddy, the historian. And in 2011, he completed his PhD from UC Berkeley in South and Southeast Asian Studies. He studied Sanskrit, Tamil, and Telugu literary traditions and completed his thesis on Vijayanagara, Emperor Krishnadevaraya, and his grand Telugu epic, Amuktamayada. The translation of Amuktamayada, as giver of the worn garland, has been published. It's his translation, and he's also released a couple of translations in the complete Kalidasa series on Malagadnotram and Meghadota. His most recent work, and the reason he's here with us today, is Raya, a critical biography of Krishnadevaraya and Vijayanagara. That's the book that you see there, filled with fascinating anecdotes about the king, but more importantly about the rich insights about the historical period, the political and the social scene around the time of Krishnadevaraya. Wonderfully presented, and I hope all of you have an opportunity to read the book. Dr. Srinivas Reddy is now a guest professor of South and Southeast Asian Studies at IIT Gandhinagar in Gujarat, and he is also a visiting professor of religious studies and contemplative studies at Brown University. I must mention that he lives in Rhode Island and spends in the US and spends his time performing and teaching and conducting research around the world because he today joins us from there. I'm particularly grateful and thankful to him for joining us today because it's now 7 a.m. at home and minus 7 degrees outside his window. So thank you very much, Dr. Srinivas Reddy, for joining us, and it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Shyam sir and Badri sir and everyone at the Tamil Heritage Trust. It's really an honor and a privilege to be with you all. I've attended many of the programs that you've done in the past, and I'm just very thankful that you invited me, and what a lovely introduction. Maybe one day I'll come back and do more on the music side of things. But yes, today we're going to talk about Raya, Krishnadevaraya, and I will try to present some kind of a general overview of Raya's kind of persona, not only as a king, but also as a poet. And I'll try to do that mostly by drawing on Krishnadevaraya's own writing. He wrote a huge, as you just heard, mahakavya called Amuktamayada, which is about Andal. But within that framework of that large kavya, we can extract a lot of historical information, cultural information, religious information. So the main source throughout the lecture will be drawing on this text written by the king himself to highlight things about not only his life, but basically the times that he lived in. And I'll try to do that. Probably I'll try to end, I don't know, around 45 minutes or so, 50 minutes. And I would really love to have a good, robust discussion, and would love to hear from the people who are listening. So again, I just want to thank Shyam sir and also Badri sir for organizing this. And now I will try to share the screen and give some presentation, which will also have some nice visual material. So you can see this, I think. Yes, all right, great. So here we are, Krishnadevaraya Vijayanagara, a king for all seasons. And the reason I picked this title, earlier some of the talks that I'd given when the book had come out were Krishnadeva Raya, India's first global leader, which I will mention that kind of an idea. For this talk, I wanted to do something a little bit different, and just thinking about who this human being was: a king, a poet, a musician. He had lots of interests and lots of talents, and this phrase, "a king for all seasons," was a title given to Sir Thomas More, who was also, a multifaceted personality, Englishman, who lived, actually, I was looking up the dates, almost exactly contemporaneous with Raya. So, he was born in the late 15th century, and he lived until the kind of early mid 16th century, which is exactly about Raya's time. And this also, of course, corresponds with King Henry VIII of England. But this name was given to Thomas More because, it was a man for all seasons, not a king, but a man for all seasons, because for two reasons. One, of course, his kind of multidisciplinary life. He was a statesman, he was a philosopher, and I think did some theological writing and that kind of thing. He was the advisor and counselor to King Henry VIII. But also the title means someone who can kind of adapt to any situation. That whatever the circumstance of the time was, they could make the right decision. They could act in the best way. They could take that opportunity and shine no matter what the context was. And when we look at Raya's life, he really exhibits that quality of whatever kind of adversities he was faced with, always kind of were also opportunities for his success and growth. And as we go through a short kind of biography of his life, I'll highlight some of these points. So before we start there, I just want to make a mention about this image that you see here, which is interesting in and of itself, because it is very, very rare to have, very rare to have descriptions of the actual physical likeness of not only kings, but anybody of that time, very clearly given. But we do have some Portuguese sources that describe how the king looked, which incidentally, and I'm not going to get into this, but incidentally are in very sharp contrast to how these statues look. I mean, in the Portuguese sources, Raya is a little bit more stout and muscular, and he has signs of smallpox, a little bit here. But here in these bronzes, which are still there in Tirupati, right outside the Garbhagriha, if you visit Tirupati, you can see them today. A lot of times people miss them, though, because in the rush, as you're going to see Venkateshwara, you're just about to get to that, inner sanctum. So you're just moving in. But if you look back as you're about to enter that Garbhagriha, you'll see that Raya is standing right there. And so this, Anjali that they're giving, this Namaskara, that's really directed directly towards Venkateshwara, who was his Ishtadevata. Anyway, the main point I'm trying to make is that it's unique to have a physical likeness of a historical king, although it was around this time when this kind of bronze work of historical kings started, becoming more popular. And by his side are his two wives, Tirumala Devi, who was from Tirupati, Tirumala area, we think, and Chinna Devi, who is his kind of junior wife, who was the purportedly, the dancing girl of not of a high caste, but kind of like his true love. And it's interesting that both of them are there with him. And it's known historically that Raya visited Tirupati at least on 7 different occasions, if not more. And on certainly many of those occasions, he brought his beloved wives along with him. So this is just a small shot at some of the historical placement of Raya. So let's move on. So here we have, again, this same bronze image, and on a stamp. And as I like to say, you're not like a bona fide famous Indian unless you finally get your Indian stamp. So Raya got his stamp, I guess, in 2011, which is, considerably late if you think about it. But this, and I don't want to get into a big political discussion about it, but as a teacher of South Asian history and culture, we are still plagued not only in the academic discipline, but in the general, I think, consciousness, both in India and outside of India, of a little bit of a lack of knowledge or a lack of integrated knowledge about North and South India. So generally, like, in Indian history classes, let's say, you learn a lot about the Mughals, and what was happening in North India, but very little about, let's say Cholas or even Vijayanagara. So it's good that it's excellent that Tamil Heritage Trust is doing these kinds of programs. And I would also like to stress the programs that Tamil Heritage Trust is supporting are not just about Tamil heritage, it's about Indian heritage overall. So that's what I mean by an integration. So you can have a love for your region, but you see your region as also connected to the greater, idea of India. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. And if we had more of this kind of integrative history, I think we'd have a much more, holistic picture of our culture. And as I said, I think this is also something that we find even in academia, is a type of, siloing off of certain disciplines and certain even geographic areas. So even in academia, I feel that it would be great if, when you study, let us say, Sanskrit, that you also maybe study a South Indian language in combination with that, and will give a much, richer perspective on, the literature and the culture and the history. So some of the background here is actually from Hampi, which I'll also, all the photographs of Hampi that are coming up are from a trip I took just a few years ago. And on that note, on that point, I just say one other thing is that history in general, I believe, is not something that's frozen in the past. And I think specifically for India, maybe even more so than other places, and we could make an argument about that, but let us say in particular, Indian history is not something that is a static thing of, the past, that's something gone and done with. It is a living place. Like Vijayanagara, which we call today Hampi. Hampi is a living little town. You can go to Hampi. There's people that live there. There's people that are still selling, vegetables in the same 500-year-old, pillared stalls where the market lane used to be. So, there's a certain sense that, history lives on in India. And I think that's a really beautiful part of, the way that Indian culture works, is things are not kind of buried and forgotten. They're just kind of layered upon and layered upon, and things kind of still seem to exist from all of these different historical layers. So I'm going to show an example of that in a second. But before we do that, let's return to Raya for a second. And the main theme that I want to bring out in this discussion is this idea of this king for all seasons. And really, this is embodied in the idea of the kavi-raja, the poet king, or in English, sometimes they call the philosopher king, like Marcus Aurelius, the great, Roman emperor. So this idea that a king, of course, had to be a good warrior, had to be great on the battlefield, but a king also had to have a solid kind of philosophical, moral, ethical base, an intellectual foundation to their activities. This was the main thing. So there's a point when, Raya has a big dream where, this Andhra Mahavishnu comes to him and says, you have to compose Amuktamayada. And then after the dream, Raya goes to his counselors and says, okay, I had this amazing dream. What should I do? And then the court kind of poets there rise up and they all sing this verse. And I'll just, read the translation. O mighty Lord, King of kings, supreme sovereign of heroic splendor, united like the highest God, half the goddess Durga, half the Lord of dance, emperor in the fields of war and letters. O Lord Krishnaraya, compose this epic poem. So the key line there is Sahiti Samarangana Sarvabhauma. So he is an emperor in both fields. What fields are these? Sahitya and war. So you have to be a great warrior and you have to be, like a poet or a master of literature. And this is really important. Of course, it's beautifully kind of put in the sense of this is an invocation of, Ardhanarishwara, an idea that, Shiva is both Parvati and Shiva together. So, or Durga and Natesha, as they're writing here. So this idea that these two aspects must be combined in one single person to be the kind of fullest embodiment of what kingship really means is at the heart of what Raya represents and what I'm trying to, show throughout the presentation. Now, within Amuktamayada, the way the Mahakavyas work is, yes, this is the story about Andal, but honestly, and it's beautiful what he says about Andal and how he describes her, but that's only, let's say, maximum 20% of the text. 80% of the text, like any other Mahakavya, will have descriptions of seasons and war and sunrises and mountains and, all these other things. So interestingly, in Amuktamayada, Raya embeds a whole section on Rajaniti, which I'll come back to later on and give some interesting quotes from that section also. But this is one of those quotes. There's a whole 80 sections on basically statecraft, and not just a very rote kind of rehearsal of Kautilya or Arthashastra type stuff. It's a very lived kind of expression of how kings should rule and make decisions, particularly for this, moment of the 16th century that he's in. So this one verse I just wanted to show where he says, a king must listen to the cries of the destitute and care for their needs, whilst never entrusting such serious matters to cowards. He must always be ready to protect his people, for if a king keeps the welfare of the people in his heart, the people will care for the welfare of the king. So what's really being expressed here is, number one, the king is not out just to conquer. The king's real job is to look after his people, the subjects of the empire. And in so doing, there is a symbiotic relationship between the king and the people, right? If the king has the people in his heart, then the people will also look after the king. And so there's this idea that these two things have to be, again, in balance. And the reason I'm saying this is that it is, in a sense, that perspective of Sahitya, poetry, the arts, culture, history, whatever, that kind of side of things that informs this kind of, I think, more holistic idea of what kingship should be like. So let's continue and see what else we can find. Right. Okay, so this is actually a picture I took. You can see this today. This is a beautiful stepwell from Hampi. And again, another verse from this section. Sometimes I can't see when the share screen is on, but what is it? The root purpose of empire, I think, right, is the acquisition of wealth. But no matter how big your empire is, build tanks and canals for the benefit of farmers, ease taxes and the grain revenues, be strong, and both artha and dharma will grow. That's a beautiful point there, that it's not mutually exclusive, that, if you're just going for, let's say, some kind of dharmic civilization, that you're not going to have money, or that if you just go for money, you can't kind of be a dharmic kind of king and rule righteously. The idea is that you can do both and that you should do both. And he was a good exemplar that kind of living, I think. We do have good historical information about the tanks, particularly that were built during Raya's reign. There's actually a long description that the Portuguese give of Portuguese engineers coming to aid and give advice to building this huge tank that was put in at that time. So this kind of stuff was really important to Raya because, and I stress this also because in the general kind of historiographic perception of Krishnadevaraya, it's like he was this great Hindu king that won every single battle, and that's what he did, and that's basically it. He was this great warrior, but he was absolutely, and we can talk about that stuff. But he was also, a very concerned king in terms of looking after the needs of his people. Okay. Oh yeah, this is kind of another example of what I meant by things that are still alive in Hampi. This is a picture that graces the back of the book, which I really love. John Groling, a wonderful photographer, and you see the temple in the background, you see the pillared hall, you see the buffalo herder still there, and this is what you see when you go to Hampi. It's not like it's an abandoned forgotten place. This is still where many people live, and that sense of history being alive, I think, is really important to think about whenever we think about Indian history. So here's a picture that I took, and this again is I wanted to give an example of this idea of a layered type of history. So in the foreground, of course, you have these huge boulders, and it's probably one of the most striking and beautiful things you find in this Deccan type of environment, these gorgeous big golden colored boulders, and in the this is an ancient kind of place, from mythological times. This area of Pampa Kshetra, which is what this is what is known as Kishkinda. This is Hanuman's place, Sugriva's place, Vali's place. This is the land of the monkey kings. This is where they all used to live. And of course, there's historical or mythic historical connections that are made between certain sites within the Hampi kind of area and stories from the Ramayana. But that, again, that's that kind of mythic layer that's there. And somehow that mythic layer also gets connected to a historical layer. So we have this like beautiful, rocky landscape, which is supposed to be the ancient land of Kishkinda. Then in the foreground, you'll see towards the right, these small little pillared kind of ruins. That was an old stratum of temples or structures that were built. And then towards the left, you'll see some very interesting structures with this kind of ridged kind of spires. That represents another level of temple building. And then, of course, in the background there, you'll see the large Virupaksha temple. And this is the main temple of Hampi, Vijayanagara. It's the titulary deity kind of the empire itself. And even in that temple, you can see that there are kind of layers of growth. The lighter colored one is obviously that Gopuram was rebuilt and redone. And then behind the Virupaksha temple, you can't see it here, but you have the Tungabhadra or Pampa River. And, again, Pampa River was kind of a sacred river for a long time. People used to worship the river itself. And it wasn't until later that Pampa then gets associated with someone like Durga or Parvati. And then you get, Parvati is there. Okay, now Shiva has to be there. And so that's how you get Virupaksha. So all of these things are layers and layers of myth and history building upon each other to create a kind of place. And like I said, you can still go to all these places. You can still give puja and have, see the Virupaksha inside this temple. There's a beautiful elephant there too that lives there. So it's actually a very lovely temple, and you can still walk down to the river and bathe there. So still a very living place. All right. Now, let's get back to some hard history on this. The period we're talking about is 1500. And there was a historian, Jaspers, I think, Jaspers, who would talk about this period 500 BC as something like an axial age, like where all these interesting things were coming together. So you had Buddha, you had Confucius, you had Pythagoras, you had all these kind of interesting new thinkers in different parts of the world. So he looks at 500 BC as what he calls an axial age. So I think 2000 years later, 1500, to me is also a type of axial age, because it's like a very interesting kind of turning point in the evolution of things. So of course we have Vijayanagara, like we were talking about. To the north, you have Bijapur and all the Bahmani sultans. So this is also a big thing to discuss. We won't get into it too much today, but obviously a new type of Islamic culture was entering into the Deccan and influencing a lot of things at Vijayanagara also. And then we also have the Gajapatis. Shyam sir had mentioned Orissa. So the Gajapatis were ruling most of Orissa, but they had actually taken most of coastal Andhra at that point. So the interesting thing I'll just point out here, and again, going back to some of the stereotypes of Vijayanagara history, is that, Vijayanagara was the Hindu empire that protected Hinduism against the onslaught of Islam. This is a standard thing that you read in many textbooks. But when you look at Raya's career as a warrior, the most antagonistic relationship he had, the biggest number of wars he fought, were with the Gajapatis, not the Bahmanis, or anybody from Bijapur. So history is more complex than like a simple axiom that we could write down. And I just want to stress that. And if people have questions about this, I can get into it in more detail. Or you can read the book. I also kind of explore a lot of these themes in the book in more detail. But the player that I wanted to talk about the most at this point are the Portuguese. Because the Portuguese come to India, Vasco comes to Kerala in 1498. And by 1510, by around the time of Raya's ascension to the throne, they're a major player in Indian Ocean trade, and they had taken Goa by this time. And so the Portuguese represent something really, really important. And of course, again, this is the inception of colonialism, global colonialism, really, throughout the world. So that's why I think this date of 1500 is really important. That's why I often call Raya India's first global leader, because he's the first person that's really dealing with, multiple kinds of empires, multiple religions, multiple people, the Portuguese from Europe. So all of this stuff, really is a fascinating kind of moment in time that gives a lot of richness to the life of someone like Krishnadeva Raya. I mean, in a sense, arguably also what I'm saying is he was a great king, had great talents, but he was also, a circumstance of his time. It's this context, it's this historical moment that allows him to kind of express himself in this way. All right. So one of the things that, and probably the most important thing, in all of these fights, you needed to have horses. Horses were like, nuclear weapons or tanks, or like, the most important, military weapon to have in that period of time. And whoever had the best horses would really win the battle. That was it. So particularly Bijapur and Vijayanagara, we're always trying to get the best horses. And because in North India, the Delhi Sultanate and all that is kind of breaking up, a lot of confusion. The overland route was kind of not so feasible. So a lot of the times, if you wanted to get horses, they had to come in by sea. And where did these horses come from? Raya even tells us in one of his verses, and it's absolutely historically correct. Khotan, Bhalk, Herat. So all of that kind of Central Asian steppe area where these really good war horses were from, were funneled into places like Hormuz, which was a place that the Portuguese had taken this port. And then from Hormuz, the Portuguese would bring them to Goa. And in Goa, they would basically have a bidding war, create a bidding war really between Bijapur and Vijayanagara to get the best price for these horses. And of course, Raya, who was, the Vijayanagara treasury was quite large, would spend as much money as he could on getting these horses, because like I was saying, the horses were the critical thing. They were the critical military component for victory. So at all costs, you have to get these things. And Raya says this directly in some of his political verses. So I think I have some there. Yeah. So here we have this is from the let me remember, Vittala Temple, the very famous Vittala Temple, if you've seen the one with the chariot. So this is the bas relief around that chariot. And, here's another perfect example. This is Indian history. Maybe we didn't write down a history like we think, Western history, but this is Indian history. Our sculpture is our history. Because in the sculptures, you can clearly see these Portuguese people with their Portuguese clothes and their Portuguese beard and, a different look there. This is exactly, and if you go around this Vittala Temple, you'll find tons of little frieze sculptures like this, where you see the horses and the Portuguese, and, it's very much an important part of what they wanted to remember. So Raya says, promote trade by providing for ports and encouraging the sale of horses, wild elephants, jewels, perfumes, pearls, and more. Merchants from distant lands. Now, this is a direct reference to the Portuguese. Direct reference. Who import elephants and war horses. Now, again, here's where poetry happens. Ashwa and Gaja. Ashwa and Gaja, horses and elephants. Now, the Portuguese were not importing elephants. Most of the elephants came from Kerala, actually. But because the way poetry works, this Ashwa and Gaja always go together. And so in the verse, it says Ashwa and Gaja, but we have to read this to really mean these merchants from distant lands, i.e. the Portuguese, who are importing these war horses, should be kept in imperial service at the capital. Treat them with prestige and provide them with towns and mansions. And if you go and read the Portuguese chronicles, there's a whole description of when one of these horse traders is invited to Vijayanagara, he's wined and dined. And so to me, this particular verse, let us say, this is not, again, a simple rehearsal of the Arthashastra. This is Raya really writing down political advice from his own lived experience as a king. And it's fascinating. And then you have the sculptural evidence in these temples that really document exactly what he's saying. It's amazing. And it's really beautiful. If you go to Hampi, you actually find that horses are everywhere. There's a big theme. Horses really were, of course, they were always a royal kind of animal. But the kind of prestige that they had is very evidenced in the sculptures throughout all of Hampi. It's quite amazing and lovely. And again, we can talk about this more too, but let me keep going. Yeah, so here's a long shot of it's all horses here. So the horse merchant I was talking about, his name is Cristóbal de Figueiredo, and he helped Raya in a particular battle at one point. And Raya was saying, why do you want to help me in this battle? And then this Cristóbal replied, the whole business of us Portuguese here is war. And, it makes a lot of sense. And it's kind of how a lot of powers function today. I mean, war is good business. Let us put it that way. And that's how the Portuguese really saw it. And that's why these horse riders were doing so well. So here are a couple more verses, again from the Rajaniti section. Protect your stables at all times and keep them well stocked with the best fodder. Entrust the care of finely bred horses and elephants to skilled and loyal servants only, never to your lords. When buying elephants, horses, or fodder, paying the salaries of good soldiers, honoring Brahmins, or indulging in personal pleasure, expense is not waste, it is gain. Okay, it's a very nice verse. And I think there's one more verse here. Yeah. Even if it is big, a quarter of the budget should go to the king's gifts and pleasures. That's like creating that ambiance of culture. Half was to maintain a powerful military, and a fourth would be put to the treasury, so into savings. But half, this is important, half of the imperial budget is going to the military. Now, here you can see, these are both images, again, taken just a few years ago from Hampi, and these are the famous Gajashalas. This is where the elephants were held. The Ashwashalas are actually, they're not in as good shape, but they are there also. And you can see the troughs, where they keep the water for the horses to drink, that you can still see those today. So, and this is right there in the imperial, because why? That the image of power. If you had elephants and horses right there next to like the royal palace, this again heightens the prestige and power of the king. All right, now we've talked sufficiently about the Samarangana side of things, I would say, the warrior side. Now let us discuss some literary things and get into the more poetic kind of aspect of Raya's personality. So Amuktamayada, of course, is about Andal, or Goda Devi, as she's known in Telugu also, an Alvar saint, the daughter of Periyalvar, or Vishnu Chitta is often talked about in this text. And before I read this beautiful verse that he has, I want to really stress this point. And this is where the kind of Tamil side of things comes in. If you look at Telugu literary history, which starts in about 1000 with Nannaya. Nannaya writes the Telugu Andhra Mahabharatam. And then, it flows like that. And most of the material that people are using to write Telugu poetry, Telugu kavya, are Puranas or Itihasas, basically stories from the Sanskrit tradition. You tell, for example, like Srinatha rewrites the Naishadiyam, Sri Harsha's Mahakavya. All these kinds of stories. The Peddana at Krishnadevaraya's own court writes Manucharitram, which is based on some Purana, old Purana. So like that, these Sanskrit themes, motifs, and ideas and stories were the basis for the bulk of Telugu literature, especially the kind of courtly kind of Telugu literature. Now, what does Raya do? Raya makes a very, I think, conscious decision to write a story about, a Tamil girl and her Tamil father. This is a really powerful thing. Now, part of that, or actually a large part, actually, I would say, of that desire really comes from, and I'll get into this a little bit later, really comes from his devotion to Sri Vaishnavism. And Sri Vaishnavism's, again, connection to the Alvars. So it's vis-a-vis a kind of religious devotion that he has personally, that he makes this turn towards the Tamil tradition as the source of, or the kernel to write this Mahakavya. So let me read this verse. As her beauty matured, she watched the world with half-open eyes. She grew quiet, reserved, her eyebrows darkened, and she frowned at playing with childish dolls. The palms of her hands and the soles of her feet turned beautifully pink, and her hair grew long and curly. Her waist became thin and her breasts grew full, pushing away her childhood. And though the others didn't notice these changes, she grew aware of her body. And in this way, day by day, her childhood slipped away. Now, this is a sensitive poem. A king writing about basically, the pubescent stage of this young girl. It's not easy to write that kind of a poem with the kind of gentleness and maturity that it takes to command a language like that. So this is Raya, really, a very sensitive poet. And I'll show a little bit more about this, like I was saying, this connection to Sri Vaishnavism. Like I mentioned, Venkateswara was his Ishtadevata. It's very clear throughout all of Amuktamayada that Raya is a very devout Sri Vaishnava. And just one point even about Sri Vaishnavism, because this is also, again, the theme, I always come back to it, but it's a major theme, is the layeredness of all of this is, the kind of Sri Vaishnavism that we're really getting is, it's like this Ramanuja Sri Vaishnavism. And Ramanuja himself, in a way, represents a type of Sanskritic, Upanishadic, you could say, type of overlay, at least theologically, on the purely Tamil Bhakti of the Alvars. So this is important to remember, that Raya, for example, is probably not reading the Divya Prabandham in Tamil, but he might be reading, a later Sanskrit kind of reimagining of, Alvar history. So these are important things to remember, that even though I'm saying, of course, he's turning his mind southward, and he is, that southwardness doesn't mean that the South is not influenced by the North already. So it's this real point that I'm trying to make is, although North is North and South is South, and yes, they have distinct histories, the real point is their distinct histories are also deeply entangled with each other in a way that's mutually kind of constitutive. So I wanted to read this. This is the Avitaraka Padyam. This is the first verse of Amuktamayada. It's beautiful. And, the first verse of any kavya, it sets the tone for everything. It shows, the deep philosophy that the poet has. And this is one of the really most beautiful verses. I love this verse. And I'll just give the conceit of it before I even read it, just so you can have an idea. The idea is that Venkateshwara and, Lakshmi, Padmavati, or, Lakshmi, Sri, are looking at each other. They're facing each other. And he's saying that in this necklace that Lakshmi has, there's an image being reflected of Venkateswara, because he's looking at her. And the same way, the Kaustubha gem, this gem that Venkateswara has, is reflecting the image of Lakshmi. They're looking at each other. But then he says, that's actually not really what's happening. They're not just like reflections of the physical body. What it is they both hold each other. They both love each other so much. They hold each other in their heart. And it's that image that's deep within their heart that's actually coming to the surface and creating that image. Now, this is a beautiful idea, and it really gets it, again, philosophically, at something very profound, that yes, there's the physical kind of element of it. The reflection is both of them as they look at each other. But the true reality of the things is really something much deeper from within. And it's that inner kind of, sense of love that he wants to bring out. So let me read the verse. It's a beautiful verse, even in the Sri Mani Chenuga, Sri Kamala. It's very, very beautiful. He is seen in the sparkle of her lovely jeweled necklace, and she is reflected in his radiant Kaustubha gem. as if the image of the other that each held within their hearts was coming into view, their bodies merging crystal pure into a single being. To this magnificent Lord of Venkata, I offer my salutations. So again, clearly Venkateswara is his Ishtadevata. And again, the connection of Sri Vaishnavism to Tirupati and to, Venkateswara in general is also very strong. And here's another verse, also in the kind of introductory part, where he makes specific mention of all of our saints. To escape the intense heat of the 12 Aditya suns, Vishnu resides in the cool, loving hearts of the 12 Alvar saints, intoxicated by the sweet cascades of nectar that fill their lotus minds. In my search for salvation, I honor these luminous bodies, 12 blessed souls of the earth. Very, very, clearly, I was mentioning, he visited Tirupati 7 times. He was a true bhakta, and it comes out when you read the poem. It really comes out. And earlier we were talking about Ranganatha, Srirangam, because of course this is where Andal, rises up and goes to Vaikuntham basically, and the whole end of Amuktamayada takes place in Srirangam. And I just wanted to again show some of these verses to show the depth of his understanding of this Sri Vaishnava philosophy, his ability to draw on all of these sources to create this beautiful poem. So, God beyond gods, you are Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. For the entire universe, you are at the force of creation, existence, and dissolution. I worship only you, Narayana, the great light, the everlasting home of all beings. You are the supreme being, beyond both man and God. You are the highest soul, constantly meditated upon by assemblies of yogis in search of salvation. You pervade every part of the natural world, and yet you cannot be classified by the 3 qualifying colors. You are imperceptible to the power of the collective senses, existing as purity without a mark. You are the source of the primal elements, stainless, pure, and all-pervading. From hours to minutes to the blink of an eye, you are the passage of the thread of time. O Vishnu, Narayana, the greatest God, I am led to service when I imagine you. It's like really powerful kind of language. All right, now I just wanted to bring us back to Hampi, make just a couple more points. And then leave us with some verses, some fun verses. So again, these are some images again from Hampi, and these are just again to show that layeredness. You have the elephants on the bottom level, you have horses, you have bowmen, but then you have these dancing girls that are also there, and you have festivals, particularly this Mahanavami, Navaratri festival, which is very well described in the Portuguese sources, shows how both religious devotion, military showmanship, political power, cultural power, all of that is like coming together in one big festival. And a lot of this is kind of displaying the same thing. And on the bottom, you'll see more of the dancing girls. On the right, you'll see hunters and horsemen again. You have camels there in the bottom right. And then in the top right, just an example of, you have both Devanagari script and Kannada script, and how much Vijayanagara was a multicultural, multilingual place. So, although of course Raya wrote in Telugu, he was of Tulu origin, we think. I'm sure he would have spoken Kannada and probably Tamil also. He definitely sponsored Sanskrit, Tamil, Kannada, poets. So there's a very clear sense that we're in a cosmopolitan world, a place that is not just about one cultural identity, but actually multiple identities coming together in one place. And again, I really highly recommend anyone spend time and visit Hampi. It's just an amazing place. And it's not, what makes Hampi really great is it's not like you just get your ticket and you see one thing. It's literally a city. You can roam around that place. You can cross the river. You can go to Anagundi. You can go to all these places. I mean, it's a sprawling city, and you can visit all these places while you're there. It's really, you can like hike around. It's really beautiful. So I highly recommend that. Okay, I'll skip this for now and just jump to some verses to close off. So this is kind of a return to the idea of a king for all seasons. And just to show you, probably one of the things that Raya loved the most was eating. So, he has this title, Andhra Bhoja, as in Bhoja the king, who was also a kavi-raja, but Raya was known as Andhra, so the Bhoja of this Andhra period. But Bhoja can also mean he's enjoying, something. So, and it's true, he was a connoisseur of life. You could feel that. And if you read the poems, you'll find that he loved food, loved food. And there's one section in chapter 1, which we'll get to and I'll end with, where he actually gives menus for each season. And these menus based on each season, again, connecting back to his religious life, he's describing what Vishnu Chitta in Viliputturu is serving to all the Vaishnava devotees that come there to visit. So it's a beautiful little section, which I'll get to in a second. And preceding that, just to again return to the theme of seasons, is talking about the different seasons is another one of the things that every Mahakavya should do. So there's like 50 verses on Grishma Ritu, summer season. There's 50 verses on Endakalam, the hot season. So like that, there's all these verses, 50 verses on Varsha Kalam, on the rainy season. So like that, a poet is able to express their kind of imaginative capacities. So here, I'm just going to read these 2 verses from the summer season, which is considered one of the most famous in Amuktamayada. And then I'll read a bunch of seasonal menus that Raya describes that bhaktas would get served. So here we go. The earth dries out from the sizzling heat, and hot steam rises as the water evaporates. The cool night moonlight is absorbed into the ground as if groups of white nightingales were pouring a round, flat dosa on a steaming hot griddle. It's a beautiful image that, the moonlight is like a dosa at night. It's beautiful. So another one, on a summer afternoon, expert Epicureans season sun-ripened mangoes in sizzling hot oil and saute fresh cuts of fish taken from dried out ponds. And at sunset, when they burp from the spice, they stroll to shady groves where they've buried coconuts in the sand and ease their tummies with refreshing juice. I mean, what a beautiful image. You have these ponds drying out, so the fish are kind of flapping around. You can easily grab them. They have these, it's summertime, so there's mangoes. They chop this up, they make this mango, fish pulusu or something. And yet these guys are smart. They know that this stuff is going to be hot and spicy, and they're going to probably get some indigestion. So earlier on, they had buried the coconuts in the sand to keep them nice and cool. So after they eat and take their nap, they go get these coconuts and refresh themselves. It's a lovely image. All right, so here are the seasonal menus. And this is, again, this is his description of Vishnu Chitta and how he serves food to the bhaktas that come. And these bhaktas, and I put this other verse in just to show, again, showing a certain kind of unity of India from the snow mountains, that's the Himalayas, all the way to these sandalwood hills, that's Mount Malaya in the south. So there's an idea. I mean, yes, there's lots of diversity in India. Of course, there's people that have all their unique ways, but there's also certain things that are connecting people, that there were devotees coming from, maybe not the Himalayas, I don't know, maybe they did, but certainly not from northern places beyond, like Tamilaham or whatever, definitely from Vijayanagara side of things. So people coming from various places to this southern locale out of their kind of devotional love. So with his hard-earned savings, that great yogi, this is Periyalvar, that great yogi served food to all the groups of visiting Vaishnavas who came and went along the road that stretches from the northern snow mountains to the southern sandalwood hills. Then he says, during the rain-drenched days, when the sky was like a bubbling spring, Vishnu Chitta's wife would expertly prepare a fire using dried coconut husks, never allowing the smoke to touch her eye. She would cook the food, and he would lovingly serve it all with a coconut shell ladle. Fine cooked rice soaked in ghee, served with peeled red lentils, 4 or 5 well-seasoned curries, crispy black lentil chips, dried vegetable stir fries, and yogurt. In the hot summer, devotees first smeared with sandalwood paste to ease the heat are served a refreshing meal. Warm white rice, jaggery flavored broths, sweet and savory porridges, sugarcane juice, fresh coconut juice, sweet cakes, various fruits, cool scented water, thin buttermilk, and tender green mangoes that fall to the ground from the heat. In the winter, hot meals are served to stave off colds. Fragrant steamed rice with ground pepper and hot ghee that burns the hand. Various curries sizzling in earthenware dishes, green vegetables flavored with mustard powder, pickled fruits, rice pudding, and a little ocean of frothy milk. So it's this kind of detail and love and precision of thought that is really evident pretty much throughout the entire text. And the reason I just wanted to show these is to balance, again, all of these things with all of the things he was doing as a king, with the horses and the battles and the everything, because it's this composite nature of his life that really made him one of the greatest, kings, rulers, leaders of, you could say, pre-modern India, if not the world at large. So I think that might be it. Oh, couple more. All right, couple more. Groups of Vaishnavas from various regions arrive in Srivilliputtur on Saturdays for just one chance to bathe in that holy river. But first they massage and anoint themselves with items prepared in Vishnu Chitta's home. Mahua flour packed deep into banana flower cups and oil filled to the brim in big clay pots. And after their bath, they walk back to his house with clean washed clothes hanging over their shoulders. Oh yeah, I wanted to add this because, again, there's explicit mention of the Divya Prabandha right here. At midnight, just outside that great Bhakta's home, one can hear the sounds of the Divya Prabandha being recited, the sacred stories of Vishnu being told, and Vishnu Chitta's own voice saying, "Forgive me, there are not many curries, nor are they very hot. We have no cake, and the meal is not that great. But please come and eat." So you can just see the reality of the vision that he had. And I think also this is because he traveled a lot, obviously, on these campaigns, and a lot of the campaigns involved laying siege to forts, so which meant basically you had a lot of free time. So I feel like this is where he gathered a lot of the imagery and ideas that he puts into his verses. And there's a certain connection, to go back to the very first thing that we started with, is a very deep connection to the people, and the idea of kingship as a connection to the subjects. So I think, Nandri, that's it. Thank you very much. I hope that was interesting, and happy to entertain questions and have good discussion. So thank you again.
Thank you. Professor Srinivas Reddy, for that very exciting talk. There are a bunch of questions, but let's just go through each one of them, and let's have a sort of conversation, because I have myself a lot of questions to really ask you. The first thing, let me come to this Amuktamayada, or even his approach to writing that. Now, one of the points that I want to understand from you, has he ever mentioned anywhere that he read the Tamil originals, or there is Tamil original of the story surrounding the Guru Parampara Prabhavam, which was originally presented in Tamil, but subsequently there are a couple of Sanskrit translations too.
Right.
I think it was
Divyasuri Charitram.
Divyasuri Charitam, and then much later, Prapanamritam. So I think certainly the Divyasuri Charitam would have been there by the time he started his work. So what was his source? Was it the Tamil one or the Sanskrit one?
So my guess is he had respect for the Tamil great tradition. Like as I was saying, he mentions Divya Prabandham, but my feeling is that he did not read those in the original, that he probably read this later Divyasuri Charitra, or maybe he didn't read that either. What I actually probably think is true is that, and there's some speculation on this, but I think that Raya was probably sent away, like many times these young kings would be, sent away to learn. And I think that he was at some Sri Vaishnava Matam, and that's where he learned. Either it was Ahobilam or Melkote, I think Ahobilam, but I think that's probably where he learned a lot of this Sri Vaishnava information, but he might not have read those stories directly.
Okay. Probably there were even Telugu versions which we are not aware of in terms of published work by that time. Assuming that he is predominantly a Telugu reader, besides the fact that he wrote in Telugu, chose Telugu to write, despite probably knowing multiple languages.
Could be, but my guess would be anything that came in Telugu would probably have come later. If anything, we know that Raya was a master of Sanskrit. In those days, if you had to write in Telugu, you had to learn Sanskrit first, right? So probably he was reading the Sanskrit stuff, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's a question from Anand Maheshwari. Is Pampa the original name of Tungabhadra? When and why was the change brought about? Because you talked about around Hampi.
Pampa was the original name, from what I know. I don't know when the change happened, because a lot of the people, when you're at Hampi, they still call it Pampa Nadi, like that. So they don't even call it Tungabhadra. I don't know when that change happened. That's a good question. Can look into that. That's a good question. But again, here's a perfect example. Pampa, that's a local name. Now there's probably been a Sanskritized etymology given to it, but basically that's a local name. Whereas Tungabhadra is clearly, a Sanskritized name of some kind that came in probably later. That would be my guess. But this is a good question. I can look into it.
Okay. And you did mention during the talk that his mother tongue was probably Tulu. Srinivasa Narayanan asked this question: what was the mother tongue of Krishnadevaraya?
Yeah, so probably Tulu, because that's generally what we know. His mother was Tulu. It was probably father too. So probably his mother tongue was Tulu, but like I said, it's very common that these kings would then leave their families and be sent somewhere else to study. So he probably learned Telugu and Sanskrit and some Tamil all along. But generally, the idea is that the Raya's mother tongue was Tulu to begin with, and that's why they call it Tuluva dynasty. So out of the three dynasties that we have, this is Raya's in the Tuluva dynasty.
Chamu Kuppuswamy has a couple of questions. One is, can you enlighten us a bit more on Chinnadevi? I'm particularly interested in whether she was a dancer or a minor royal, as discussed by Raki Rangarajan in his book Non-Krishnadevaraya. No, this is a Tamil sort of written in the form of an autobiography of Krishnadevaraya writing his own story, where he apparently describes Chinnadevi as a minor royal. But you mentioned that she's a dancer during your...
Yeah. Generally in the, like, let us say, folk mythology, that she's known as a dancing girl, and definitely not a royal figure. And even in the Portuguese sources, they mention this exact point. They say that she is a dancing girl who is not of the station to marry Raya. But then this is the interesting part. And that's why I mentioned that when I showed that image, is even though she was of that, caste or, whatever strata of the society, he did marry her and he did bring her along everywhere. And he had her right by his side to the point where they made a statue of her. So my answer would be, she started as a dancing girl, and then after marrying Raya, she became a minor royalty.
Probably major royal by then, right?
Yeah.
She also has a question, which is also a very interesting question. The timing matches, right? Like she's asking, how much of artistic interaction did Krishnadevaraya and Sri Purandaradasa have? And they were living at the same time and near the same region. Any mention anywhere?
That's a great question, and actually it's something that I want to explore more, which I didn't. But somebody told me that there is a Purandaradasa Kirtana that mentions Raya, but when I asked them to send me the reference, they stopped emailing me. So I'm waiting for that reference, because it's true that there has to be some. And Raya was also known to be a famous veena player, so he also had some musical talents. But what the question was asking something else. I think I might have missed that. I think there is some story that Purandadas also came to Vijayanagara court. So I actually want to do more research on this point. In fact, I think it would be a great thing, because then you have Annamaya visiting another Vijayanagara king. I think it would be a great project to look at all the musical kind of connections to, because for example, and I did some research on this. This is more scholarly textual, but they have this idea of the Vijayanagara Nonet, like the 9 Navaratra of Sangita Shastra. So these are scholarly guys, not necessarily musicians, but scholarly guys who all came and were at Vijayanagara court. So Vijayanagara was definitely a very musical place. So that's a good question. Also, I need to do more research. So if anybody has any references of Purandaradasa coming to Vijayanagara or Purandaradasa Kirtanas that are directly related to Raya, then I would be fascinated to know about them.
Okay, great. There are a couple of questions also from Srinivas Nagaraja. The first is connected to horse trade. Is it true that Nayaka kings who later ruled TN, Tamil Nadu, were originally horse trading clan? That's his first question.
I don't know. I don't know that connection. Although I generally would say this: the whole Nayaka period is kind of like has its aftermath connection to Vijayanagara. So there's always a sense that the Nayakas are looking back at someone like Raya as like the ideal great king. The whole this one. Why am I just forgetting the name? It's a major source of Vijayanagara history. Is actually written during Nayaka period time. It's escaping me the name of the text right now. Raya Vachakam was a Telugu text written in Nayaka period, but it basically envisions what it would be like to be a Sthanapati at Krishnadevaraya's court. So the whole So the whole imagination of the Nayakas is that Raya represents kind of like the kind of pinnacle of kingship. So yeah, it's possible that some of the horse trading connections of that period went down to the south. But I don't know. That's a good question. We'll have to look into that too.
Okay. And he also brings up the question, which, because you mentioned that axial age, 1500. But I also thought you would explore a little bit of the relationship that Krishnadevaraya had with the Bahami sultans and the Portuguese. So Srinivas' question is, was it cordial? Did they make an alliance to fight Gajapatis? That's his question.
Did they make an alliance to fight the Gajapatis? No. Raya basically fought the Gajapatis on his own. Now, all I want to say about the Bahmanis is, like I said, historically, in the sense of historiography, as in the history textbooks, even if most textbooks still have this, that it was Vijayanagara was, the holding place of Hinduism against, these attacking Islamic rulers. And, that's just not the case when we read the information. Yes, there was massive antagonism that happened also between Bijapur and Vijayanagara, for sure, particularly in regard to Raichur area, that they were always fighting amongst themselves to get back. But there were also plenty of times, for example, there's 5 Bahmanis sultans, right? So the Bahmanis was this empire that came after the Delhi Sultanate. They moved down. The Bahmanis set up in the Deccan area, and then these Bahmanis split up into 5 groups. So Bijapur is a big one, Ahmednagar, Berar, Golconda, like that. And those guys, you were fighting amongst each other, right? And sometimes Vijayanagara and one of the Bahmanis would team up against one of them. Sometimes this would, it was all mixing up like that. It just happened that at one point, at that Battle of Talakota, that all 5 of them got together to defeat. And so you get this idea that Vijayanagara ended because the Islamic sultans had, banded together, which is to a certain extent true, but it wasn't based on a religious kind of identity. That's the main thing. That's the main thing to understand, that these were all powers going back and forth. There was even times when, Bijapur was sending princesses to get married. So there was intermarriage between Vijayanagara and Bijapur. So this is important to remember. I mean, but I don't also want to de-stress the idea that religious difference was not there. It was there. We have to accept that also.
From the origin of Harihara, Bukka, and Kumara Kampanna, the point was about fighting the Islamic forces to stop the movement towards south and to reclaim Madurai and defeating Madurai sultans in a sense.
But take Harihara and Bukka. I mean, they're such an interesting example. So Kakatiyas are kind of destroyed by these invading forces.
Right.
Now, Harihara and Bukka are trying to exert themselves as these local chiefs. They get captured. They get sent to Delhi. And they convert to Islam because that was the right thing to do. Then they get sent back with the kind of auspices of the Delhi Sultan saying, go and set up something down there and work for, the expansion of this empire. And not necessarily Islam per se, but it was just like part of what was going on. And then basically they came down south and did whatever they wanted to do and remained as Hindu as they were before.
Right.
So it was complex. Well, the really, again, to stress this point, religion was, of course, an important factor in all of this, but it was one of multiple factors. It cannot be considered the one and only factor. That's the main thing.
Sure. And the role of Portuguese. Were they merely as supplier of horses, took part in some of the wars, and as chroniclers? What was the primary role they had in the relationship across?
Yeah, so it's like that one Portuguese horse trader said, our business is war. But really, I mean, war in the sense of they wanted to make money for their empire, and empire was their main goal. So even the idea of chroniclers is we need information about these places that we're conquering. So these chroniclers would send their stories back so that the other Portuguese people in Portugal would learn about what was going on in India, this great place that they had come. The horse trading was, again, very lucrative. And the more the Bijapur and Vijayanagara and all these people were fighting, the more horses they would need and the more money would come to the Portuguese. So it was like finances, war, power, all of that linked together. But really the key is servicing the idea and the expansion of empire. That's what the main Portuguese goal was.
Okay. I have a question. If you look at the way Portuguese dealt with the locals in Goa or the Kerala coast or even Sri Lanka, that's not the way they behaved with, for example, Krishnadeva Raya, who was a mighty ruler. Yep. Whereas they just, they were aggressive, they were, very tough in the coast. Sri Lanka, they wrought havoc in Sri Lanka. But, with Krishnadevaraya, the relationship is very different. Yeah. So how, what were they, have they talked about, the Portuguese sources talk about their behavior elsewhere vis-a-vis here, the subtle distinctions, etc.?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, observation, and it relates very much to the unique nature of Portuguese colonialism. And Portuguese colonialism, as opposed to, let us say, British colonialism, was, for the most part, it was a coastal empire. The whole Portuguese system of empire was pick up port cities along the coast. That's why you see all along the, east coast of Africa, that Saudi Arabia peninsula, then coming down west coast of India, then moving along, then they make their way all the way to Sri Lanka, then they make their way all the way to Japan. So their empire was big, but it was coastal. They always just wanted to stay. So when it came to taking port cities or coastal areas, they were pretty aggressive and violent, I would say. All the stories of what happened in Kerala, burning of the ships and all of this kind of stuff. Taking of Goa was very violent. So it was violent along the coast. But when it came to the inland empires, they just wanted, they didn't want to conquer them. They wanted to do business with them, because they understood, I have the ports, so anything that comes into the port, I'm going to get some money on. So I need this inner kingdom guy, inland kingdom guy, to be my friend, to get good business and make more money off it. They weren't out there to conquer him. They just wanted to do business with him. That's the thing.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Sharda Balaji has a comment and a question where you were talking about, in Amuktamayada, a passage of, so she says the passage on the growing Andal is beautiful. A more beautiful passage in your translation is when you describe her birth, the emerald green landscape. That's her comment. I'm sure you can recall and talk about it a little bit. I will also ask a question. Have you translated the entire Amuktamayada into English? Penguin edition is not complete.
That's so someone actually read my book. Thank you. Yes, that first verse about Andal's birth, when Vishnu Chitta finds her. When Vishnu Chitta finds her in the bushes, that is very beautiful. I mean, I can pull it up and read it if you'd like. But no, I have not translated the whole thing. But that is one of my dreams to do that. I did translate large sections of the Rajaniti I used in the book, and even here you saw, they were not published in that Giver of the Worn Garland. There's a beautiful section, absolutely beautiful section called Maladasa Charitra, basically the story of this Dasi, Mala. He's a Mala from the Mala community, so untouchable. But he's a Bhakta, and he saves this Brahma Rakshasa from from dying, basically. It's a beautiful story. That section I published in a journal.
This is the what we call as the Kaisika Purana.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is enacted in some of the even southern temples like Naguneri and such places.
Exactly. From Kaisika Purana, exactly.
Okay.
So yes, thank you for reading that, and hopefully one day, because what I really want to translate true is that whole section with Yamunacharya's story, which is again an important part of the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. So I one day I would love to do that.
Okay, great. Then there is a comment from Krishnan Ramarao, where it says Vyasaraja, the guru of Krishnadevaraya, has installed more than 732 Hanuman temples of Madhva Sampradaya.
Yeah, he's Madhva, yeah.
And Krishnadevaraya has donated so much for the temple in building and maintaining and developing Vaishnava Madhva Sampradaya. The interesting, I mean, I don't know whether he is trying, presenting this as a comment in response to your statement that he was moved primarily by the Ramanuja Sri Vaishnavam.
Yeah. So
the interesting part is that before you can answer, so his guru is someone belonging to the Ananta Tirtha, the Madhva Sampradaya, and he's writing the one major work, the extant work is on the Ramanuja Sampradaya. Maybe you can comment on that.
So and a few people have brought this point to me before, and which I think is very interesting. But I will say two things about that. One is, even outside of Vaishnavism, he supported Shaiva temples too.
That's right.
That's right. So the key point we need to really understand is there is a certain kind of, what they call Ubhaya Vedanta, or, non-sectarian approach to all of this stuff. So I don't even think it's okay if this all happens. It was fine. And the fact that, the Rajaguru was from, Madhva Sampradaya, that was okay. My point really is, when you read the text, when you read his work, when you read, his life, he was, of course, I think, just a devout person, and would, he visited Kalahasti, visited all of these, Shaiva temples, visited all sorts of different temples. But I think in his personal own Ishtadevata was Venkateswara, and his own personal, and I think, again, deep original background and education was in Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. That's the feeling I get.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand. In fact, before the talk, we talked about Srirangam and the dispute between the Srirangam temple and the Thiruvanikal, the Shiva temple. And there was a judgment that, so both went to Krishnadevaraya, the procession, and you said you will talk about that. So I'm leaving that to you to talk about.
No, I was just saying, we can talk about it in the sense that this is exactly the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. Is, there were some disputes, these kinds of things. There's some inscriptions, I think, that evidence that. That's where that comes from. Yeah, but
so just for the context for others to follow, the dispute was the procession of the Srirangam temple and where all it can go, and that of the Shiva temple, and there that's what resulted in a dispute, and the two sides fought. And naturally, at the time, Krishnadevaraya was the sovereign over this entire region, and he clearly then demarcated the region, and the stones are still there, marking the region for the either temple's procession, and that is followed to this day. And some of these stone pieces can still be seen in Srirangam.
I didn't know that. Okay, that's interesting.
Yes. And that naturally, I mean, when there are temples have devotees fight, and the king, while supporting all the temples, will still have to come up with fairly tough decisions.
Exactly.
They can't say, no, I am Vaishnava, so Srirangam temple gets everything.
Exactly. So that's exactly what I'm saying. Even though I might say that he's a Sri Vaishnava, he will not come and say, at least I don't think he would, and as this story shows, he didn't come and say, "Are yaar, this is a Vaishnava place. There's no Shaiva movement around here at all." It's just not how these people were.
Right.
What again? Just to stress, I just think this shows a kind of ecumenical spirit of the times, and a person like the king.
There's a question from Arvind Iyer. Does the Amuktamayada have references to debates among scholars representing dominant, I assume, philosophical schools of thought of their time?
Yeah, there's in chapter 2 or 3. The whole beginning of that chapter is, this Mannaru Swami in Villiputtur comes and says, there's a Pandya king, and he's not sure about which sampradaya or which matam is the best one, and so you need to go and support me and be my advocate. And so he goes, and there's a beautiful section in that where Raya is also again showing off. This is an opportunity for him to show off his knowledge of the Brahma Sutras. Have you read that? So
please go ahead.
So there is a section where he does that, and then, and I didn't translate this part, there's a huge part of this Keshidwaja Samvada that happens, and that's again a story, Puranic story that gets very philosophical in nature. So there's one section where this kind of Vaishnava Sampradaya, it's not clear that it's Sri Vaishnava, but to me it's pretty clear, dominates and wins. So he debates the Vedantins, he debates the Sankhya guys, he debates the Yoga guys. So like that, he breaks down all of these schools and he wins.
Oh, this is interesting. Actually, I have access to your book, but it'd be really nice to have the entire work translated into Tamil. I don't know whether it has been attempted, Tamil translation, where
I don't think so.
in your research, did you come across any Tamil translation or
Tamil translation of Amuktamayada?
Yes.
No, I didn't.
Okay, I think it is worthwhile.
That's a good job for you.
Yeah, let's find out. It's not impossible to find people who are comfortable bilinguals in Telugu and Tamil, so that they can attempt a direct one. True English is a possibility. Again, if there is a complete comprehensive English translation, but you will lose out. I mean, it will be easier perhaps to translate between from Telugu to Tamil directly.
Yeah.
But let's see.
Definitely, using a link language is, it's just another layer of complication that you're going to run into.
There is a comment from Sindhu Satish. It says, wonderful session, thank you. She says she's reading a Kannada novel called Tejo Tungabhadra by Vasudendra, which is about the time of Krishnadeva Raya and covers Lisbon, Vijayanagara, and Goa. Novel. So that's a maybe small nugget for you, though you can use it for your future research.
Yeah, this is kind of what I'm talking about, this 1500 year, because you enter into that moment in time, and all of these places are connected now. I mean, these Portuguese guys are going back to Lisbon, these guys are going to Goa. So it's fascinating, very fascinating.
There is a comment from Ramaswamy who says scholars like Valery Stoker have been responsible for building up and overemphasizing sectarian tendencies like Saiva Vaishnava tussles. And he mentions the name of a book, Polemics and Patronage in the City of Victory.
Yeah, I know it.
And, which is where your point is that Krishnadevaraya particularly was very open, and across all religions he was supporting them, and all sects. So you have any specific comment on this particular point?
Well, without, I mean, I know that book, and I understand how like scholarship, particularly Western scholarship, although scholarship in India too, works. And again, without having to make such a huge generalization, although I will do it, because, you know, if I had to say something that I feel is beautiful about the Indian way of thinking and being, is that what appears like contradiction to a Western mind is not a contradiction to an Indian mind at all. That things that seem like they cannot fit together, or things that are like, you know, incompatible, for an Indian is okay. Like I mean, I'll just tell a quick story, and you know, this, you know, I grew up in a very, I would say, not very, but pretty normally religious household, pujas and going to temple, and, you know, we had fun and it was good. And then as I kind of got older in my teenage years, I would say, oh gosh, all this temples, how could you say God isn't a statue? Why are you doing all these rituals? These people, you know, don't even know what they're talking about, blah, 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 blah. So I'd go to my father, who was a scientist, and I'd say, Nana, what is this? You know, how can God be in a stone? Why are we doing? And he'd say, "You're right. That's right." And then I would say, "Well, why do you go and do all these pujas?" He said, "Yes, that's right. That's right." So everything he's saying, that's right. That's right. And I didn't understand that, because for me it was like this zero-sum game always. You know, like if this is right, then this is wrong. You know, if this is right, then this is wrong. So he was saying this is right and this is right. I couldn't understand that. It was only until I became older that I realized what that meant. And that to me is the Indian way, that this is right and this is right. You know, it's okay. But when you get scholarship now, particularly in the West, you know, they love to make like, this is Shaiva and this is Vaishnava and this is this. And like, you know, they don't exist together. It's like the Indian way is that those things can exist together, and they do exist together. And obviously, as we were here seeing in our own history all the time, it's not like people don't fight and get petty about plenty of things. But there's a way that kind of pettiness is also transcended into a sense of, you know, mutual respect, mutual kind of appreciation and acceptance. And, you know, if I think about that, I think that that's the great quality of India that we Indians also need to remember sometimes ourselves. And that's what we can contribute to the world, that sense of a kind of, you know, live and let live. Or as my guru used to say, my Jain guru's guru used to say, instead of live and let live and live.
Okay. Thank you. On that note, Professor Srinivas Reddy, it was a fantastic session. How do you present a great poet like Krishnadevaraya, who was also a king and a warrior, and you know, what aspects to present in about an hour? You have limited time, and you did a fantastic job. Thank you, and you showed a certain aspect of him. I mean, we have you know, we've had any list of great kings of India, he would certainly be there. But to really get into the details of all his aspects in the short time that is there, you were really great. Thank you for your time. And the early morning, and as Shyam in the introduction said, with the kind of the weather that you have, thank you to you for presenting this wonderful talk. And
thank you very much.
Thank you once again. And we will there are a couple of people who wanted your contact email. I've asked them to mail me, and with your permission, you know, if they basically primarily to talk about this or related research. So with your permission, I can share to those who are asking. I will do that. And thank you on behalf of Tamil Heritage Trust for wonderful talk once again.
Thank you. And I have to say thank you to all of you for doing this. This is so important, and I really appreciate everything you're doing. And thank you to everyone who listened and gave their time. It's an honor.